One day, George the steamroller was waiting for Percy to take him to a new workplace. George was being rude to Rheneas and Skarloey, replied Skarloey, retorted George. Then Percy arrived to take George away. He was still rebelling. The little engines were pleased to see him go. George grumbled all the way to the old branch line. He was going to turn it into a road. When they arrived, George was rude again. Said Percy. Huffed George. Percy was still fuming when he met Thomas. Puffed Thomas. George was now enjoying himself. He chortled. Thomas took no notice. George felt insulted. But Thomas didn't hear. At last, the workmen reached the level crossing. Said George. So they did, but not properly, and George knew it. Later, Thomas was traveling home on the same line. He was pulling freight cars filled with vegetables. The signalman had forgotten to warn his driver about the crossing. Said Thomas happily. Called his driver. But it was too late. Next day, Percy told Gordon all about George. Snorted Gordon. George was taken to some yards to work. Duck arrived with a train of empty freight cars. George was blocking his way, and a car was stuck on the main line. Demanded Duck. Replied George. Said George. Duck's driver went to complain to the station master, but the signalman had set the signal to allow Gordon to speed through. His passengers were singing his praises, and he was making express time. He whistled long and hard as he approached the station. Suddenly, he saw a freight car on the line ahead. But the freight car wouldn't move until Gordon forced it by accident. Gordon was worried that Sir Topham Hatt would be cross. He was, but not with Gordon. And he did, a few days later. Said Thomas. George had been found out by Sir Topham Hatt and punished. He looked miserable. Said Percy. Said George sadly.